Har vi några engelsktalande? An English speaking?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
One English speaking. Is the assembly okay with taking this in English?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. And so my name is Elia Morling. In English, many people say Elijah. And I work as a communication strategist. And I work with digital communication in 18 years and with tribal marketing in 7 years. And it's quite interesting being here. It's the first year for me to be here. And I feel that the map of what I'm about to talk to is being rewritten for each discussion that I'm having with someone. So it's been a very dynamic process, and I'm sure that if I held the session tomorrow, it would be very different. And I think it's just wonderful that we have come to the place where we can start talking about people. Because I feel that the last 7 to 10 years, we have been very focused on technology in many different aspects. But in the end, it's about people, I think. And that's what tribal marketing is all about. Does anyone agree with this analysis of moving from technology to people and recognizing that? Yeah, one at least. And so that's kind of like the journey that we have been on, and that I hope that we will continue progressing towards. We have been talking a lot about technology in the last few years. And let's start talking about people more. So what happens is when we start talking about people is that it ends up being a lot of psychology in the terms of thinking about people as individuals, because that's historically where we are coming from. But in this new social environment that social media presents, it's really about the social aspects of being human. And then we have to start adding insights from anthropology, and that's what I feel is really missing. And that's also what tribal marketing, that's where it comes from, is understanding how people act as a group in the social environment. And this is also a good, it's not only a map of where I hope we are headed, it's also a good presentation of myself. I have a technical background in that I began programming when I was 9 years old. And I've been making computer games all my life. And I've also run a web agency called Familjen, which today is a communication agency, that I left 7 years ago and started tribaling as a response to what I saw was we need new ways of thinking and new ways of communicating. So that's why I started tribaling. And I'm very happy to be able to share some of those insights with all of you, because I meet a lot of people that are working with communication in different ways, and they understand what I say when I start talking about it, but very few have heard about tribal marketing really. Some people have, like a very shallow understanding. I hope to give you a bit more and hopefully, spark the interest and curiosity from a few more to, take up the torch and walk this path with me. And in Europe, I know of 2 agencies that work with tribal marketing, and I know of 2 in the US, and that's it. So it's not really everywhere in that sense. So there's a lot to be done. And so I hope you want to take this journey with me. And thousands of years ago, we belonged to one community, in that sense that we belonged to one tribe or a clan. And it was very much who we were. We followed one leader, we had one dress code, and at the nights we sat next to the fireplace and we shared stories about our feats and glories and all of that. And we also belonged to one domain, one place. It was a physical space. And that was what defined us. It was what kept us together. And it was, the binding factor was blood. So we had blood ties, and that was our definition of who we were as people. Now, thousands of years later, we belong to tribes. But we do not belong to one tribe, we belong to tons of them. So, coming up to this point, the first time being here, I asked on the Facebook group, is there going to be a projector? And they said no, and there was a lot of sour remarks about that. So I said, okay, yeah, it's a good way, to catch the vibe of the group and so on. And so I said, okay, let's forget projector. I'll do something with paper mache and origami. And I wrote it basically as a joke, and then I started thinking, okay, if I'm going to do something with paper mache, what is it going to be? And then I started thinking about how can I crunch my slides down, and then I ended up with this mask. And it was a very interesting project because I haven't worked with paper mache since I was 9 maybe. But it was very fun as well, and I learned a lot of things, that making a mask like this takes 3 days because of the time it takes to dry and so on. And what I did basically was I made a collage of lots of the different types of communities and tribes that I potentially can connect with. And I made a whole list, and this is just, you know, a few of them. And I like to say that I've lived 3 lives. I was born and raised in Alexandria, Egypt, and I've lived over a decade in Stockholm, and now since 3 years back I live in Bjärkasäby, a small village outside of Linköping, and I have a small sheep farm there. But what that has taught me is the importance of culture and how to adapt to different cultures and read different cultures. So that tribaling is really an extension of my life history in a way. I've learned to read cultures and adapt to them. And that's something which life has taught me basically. And the interesting thing with all of these different tribes is that we have lots of different passions, and passions is what binds us together. I'm just going to say in Swedish, på svenska kallar jag tribal marketing för gemenskapsmarknadsföring. Och tribes kallar för gemenskaper. Så om ni hör de termerna så är det i samma sfär så att säga. Det är liksom översättningen. And what's interesting about these tribes is that it's what we use to connect with others. So if it was blood before, it's passion today which defines us at large. And if we just look back maybe a few decades ago, we found that we basically inherited our life in many ways. We inherited a farm, for example. We inherited a job. And we were very much similar in the way that we were throughout our life. The path was very much chosen for us. And it was more predictable in a sense. And we gained a lot of our guidance from institutions like churches and from the state and from the union and so forth. And we were very fixed in our identity. But now we see a new landscape growing up. I mean, it's becoming just more of everything, basically. Just more people that want to talk to us, more messages, more channels, more content. And there's also this fragmentation that we talk about in the media landscape is also a fragmentation of the self. So that I'm no longer just a shoemaker. I also make computer games. I'm a communication strategist. I like Chicago, the American football team, skateboarding, and so on. And but what is interesting is that despite all those changes, a lot of companies are stuck in the paradigm that was 20 to 30 to 40 years ago. So while reality is changing, the frameworks that we use are a bit outdated. So everybody is recognizing, yes, a lot of things have changed, but we really need to update our thinking as well. And that's part of what I want to share, and I'm sure all of you have also lots to contribute at the end. And I mean, one thing that is a big change is I've had the help of Daniel Erkstam to complete this mask. And basically it's a very machinistic view of the brain, in the sense that where we come from when we train in communication is that we really use the tools for mass communication at large. And it's coming from a history of really, you know, hammering together a message and then just hammering it into people, just programming them. And that's what a lot of, you know, like brand strategies are based on, that idea of positioning in the brain. And then you bam, 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 50,000 messages, and then ding, they get it. But it's just more complex than that. Because what goes on is that it's not that easy. We do not get programmed that easy. If you look at, for example, internet memes, one interesting thing is that they change. Because there's a constant negotiation going on. And that is part of the social play that we do. It's about negotiation. So we have to move from an idea of programming and one-directional communication to actually doing things together with our clients and our customers and getting into a more of a circular communication idea. And one way that this is expressed, besides the idea of mass communication and so on, is this idea of how we define our target group. There are many ways to do that, but one of the most common ways to do that still today is that you use segmentation in the sense that you find a set of markers or characteristics that your target group has. For example, you say that we want to target 30-year-old females in Stockholm City. So what we have in the end is a bunch of dots. But the question then becomes, what do these people have in common? And the answer is very little. But remember what I said earlier, 40 years ago they had more in common. So that's why these ideas have prevailed, because it was easier to find these large masses. It's becoming increasingly difficult to do that today. And they have very little in common. And what we find that they have in common is no longer, for example, nationality is not as important. Job is important, but not as important as it was before. Our social class is less important. What we find is more and more the common denominator are the passions. So in the end, we want to have a view of reality where people actually are in a network instead. And that's one of the fundamentals of tribal marketing, is defining your tribes as your audiences instead. So there's one major difference between tribal marketing and traditional marketing. And that is that it's not about the thing that everyone is always talking about, building a strong relationship between the brand and the individual customer, which we hear all the time. It's about the relationship. The thing about tribal marketing is supporting the relationships between people. And that's why it is truly customer-centric in that sense. And that a byproduct of that is loyalty towards the brand and so on. But where I get a lot of my inspiration for tribal marketing is from an area of study called consumer culture theory. And they've done a lot of studies on brands, and they have a very different take on it than coming from a psychological framework, in that we're not that interested in relationships with brands, really. There are some. Most of us want to use brands in a different way. We use them as resources. So I think that, people like talking about brands and how you can form strong relationships with your customers, in part because I think that's what clients like to hear. But what is more the driving force is people, and then how we then use brands in different ways. And there are two ways you can use tribal marketing. And the most common one when you talk about it that people get in their mind is the idea that you can build your own tribe. That you build a strong community, which is your closest followers and fans and so on. And that's one type of tribe. It's called the brand community. The second type of tribal marketing, which is not as widely recognized, is the ability to find existing tribes and then go out and communicate your message and your offering to them. But you have to do that in a new way. So there are two ways to do that. And I'm going to, during the rest of this session, I'm going to talk more about the second one, which is not as common. When it comes to building a brand community, I'm going to do that tomorrow, but in the startup race. And so if you're interested in that, I can recommend that session. And the interesting thing about social media is that I think that when, with the whole thing sprung up, we had this idea that this would be the fantastic opportunity for people to really engage with brands. And a lot of us thought that from the very beginning, and we did what we could to do that. And of course, you can find the people where you're very, very, very useful for. They love what you stand for and so on. But the truth is that most people do not want a relationship with a brand in social media. We come to social media to spend time with family and friends. And there are very few brands that we really want to interact with in that way. So tribal marketing is not about disrupting that experience. It's more about going with that flow letting people do what they want to do when they are in social media and helping them do that more and better. And so that's also one thing which differs tribal marketing from traditional marketing in that sense, that it's more about a flow than a distraction. And I think all studies have started to think of social media, it's more, like a football game. Because when you see people or traffic coming from social media, they do not go as deep as when they come from other channels. So it's more in that sense that I may be playing football maybe with my friends. And you may be doing something fantastic like giving away free stuff or whatever. I'm not interested in that. I want to play football. So that's why you see people when they're on social media, they're pretty focused on what they're doing there. They are there with an intent of communicating with others, and then maybe you hear an interesting message and you will look at it, but you will not go that deep in your visitation. That's what the statistics tell us. And that's why I think it's important to start thinking in the terms of flow and not distraction and disruption. And another thing that we find interesting is that we want to hear about new products and features from our friends, not from companies or brands. So that we see that in this new environment we are interested in engaging with the people that matter to us the most, and we want to hear about news from them. And that's what also other studies see, that we want to rely on peers. If we, for example, are looking for I don't know, you want to buy a Vespa maybe, then you would be interested, a lot of people would be interested to connect with the community of Vespa drivers to hear from them what are the perks and so on. And what I think is really interesting is this idea of context and how we create a room. In the sense that you can say the same thing in a different way and you will create an entirely new room. And I don't know if you thought about this, but when we talk to children, for example, we maybe change our voice. We start talking a little bit more childish. And what we're doing is we're creating another type of room, another type of experience, another type of being with them. And for example, yesterday after the supper, I was talking with Britt Stakston, and we were talking about Prince because we are both fans of Prince. And in that discussion, we create a room. And what happens in that room is that we share all the things that we have in common. All of the songs and of the culture and what Prince stands for and so on. And what I think is interesting is that brands can create these types of rooms. So that how you communicate with your customer is going to open a different type of room. I don't know if you've been in that situation where you've been talking with sharing something intimate about a very deep passion. It could be deep sea diving or whatever, and then a third person comes in, and you know that they're not really in that crowd. They do not understand that jargon and so on, and it feels a bit uncomfortable. And that feeling is sometimes the feeling you get in social media when companies want to enter the conversation. They are not really sharing the culture in that sense. And it's also the same when you are at a party. I mean, a lot of us have been to different places where we feel out of place. And the reason we do is that we are not in that same frequency, we're not sharing that culture, we do not understand the language. Like maybe a lot of people have been to places where there are lots and lots of programmers and they're talking about PHP and .NET and Lean, and you don't know what they're talking about. And that is this interesting thing, that we create rooms, we create frequencies where we share things. And this is part of this tribal society, that we just move in and out of these different rooms with ease. And the brands can become the door to that room. So that basically this mask is all made up of different brands. But they become a vector or a portal for me to talk with you and for us to share something. So back to the idea of brands as resources. We use brands as a way to connect, and that's one of the fundamentals of tribal marketing, is that you want to build a large linking value. You want to become as important as possible for creating that door. So that when we enter that door, we feel, yes, I'm at home here, I'm connecting with Jesper, we're talking about these different things. And that's the type of place that brands can take in this new paradigm. So, then diving into, that's more of, like the background part of it. And So how do we do tribal marketing? I use 4 different steps. When I say steps, it's not, like a waterfall. It's more, of a circular pattern in that you do things in loops. And everyone familiar with agile development understands this. So I'm going to share them with you as 4 steps, but you do them over and over again, and that's what learning is about. So the first step is what I call identifying tribes. And the second step is about mapping tribes. And the third step is about contribution. And the fourth step is about collaboration. And I don't have any slides on that, and if you want to connect with that, you can find a lot of this information on my blog or just contact me and so on. What many people find difficult is the first step, which is identification. I mean, what tribes are you going to talk with, connect with? And what you have to do is you have to find the overlap. You have to have a mindset of finding overlaps. Because you are coming with a history, and you are a company that stands for a set of values, and that has to connect with other people, or the dissonance becomes too large, the gap becomes too large. So one thing that you could look at is, for example, the category. In our category of products and services, what type of tribes exist there? For example, if I'm selling a programmer product, WordPress would be one maybe. The lean tribe would be one. So there are tribes both that you have in your private sphere, but also in your work life. So that you could use tribes also in business to business. But other overlaps can be, for example, the big why, the purpose why you exist. Maybe your purpose aligns with why another tribe exists. But it could also be looking at the people working at your company. What tribes are they a member of? Always looking for, the overlap. And I think it takes a bit of practice, just seeing these tribes takes a bit of practice. But the first step is identifying tribes, and then of course making assessment of which one is going to align with the goals that you want to reach. The next step, once you have identified your tribes, some people that say that they do tribal marketing, they have a tribe and it kind of ends with that. They have their tribe, but nothing really happens after that, nothing really fundamentally different. And I have one thing which I call the tribal map. So it's very much about culture and trying to understand people and what they have in common. And what we talked about, the frequencies and the rooms that they enter. So some of the different components of this is, for example, the places they meet in. What are the Facebook groups, the forums, what Twitter hashtags are they communicating in? What about the stories? What do they like to talk about? What do those stories say about them? I mean, when you are talking with your deep sea diving or fishing friends, you are sharing a number of stories which you have, or stories of TV shows you have seen and so on. And if you truly want to start connecting with people, you have to start connecting with these stories. Another thing which is very interesting to look at is the actual experience and what those experiences mean. In anthropology, you would talk a lot about rituals and traditions. It's this idea of that when we want to change ourselves, we do something. Like if you want to feel a lot fresher, you take a shower. Yes, you are cleaner, but you also feel cleaner. You have move yourself to another state of being in your mind. And another component which is really important to understand is the language, the jargon. Because you can see companies trying to enter a space where people interact with each other, but they're doing it in a very clumsy way. So it's not just about identifying a tribe, it's also tapping into that frequency and sharing that language. Another important part which is a hot topic today is finding influencers. Because in each tribe you will find a set of influencers which will impact the rest the most. And you can do your homework and you can find those influencers. And another part which I look at also the artifacts. What are the neighboring types of symbols and brands which this tribe associates with? But just want to dive into one thing with the influencers. I'm going to talk also a lot about influencers on the session during the startup session that I'm holding. And I've identified 7 different types of influencers which influence people in different ways. I mean, the most obvious is, I call this the 7 C's of tribal influence. And the first C is the chieftains. And everybody can relate to them. They are the natural leaders. Maybe are the one that started a movement, or they are holding the meetups and so on. But they are the ones that people look up to. But then you have the cooks, and they are the people that create things. They write blog posts. They create content for the tribe in general. And you see some of these different types of roles, they overlap of course, but it's a way of understanding in which ways they can influence. They are the collectors. They do not really essentially create things. They're just very good at finding things and bringing them to the tribe and sharing them. And I'm sure all of you have those people, if you, for example, are on Twitter. They're very good at what is called curation. And the best curators are not the ones that find an article, take the headline and just post it. The best curators are the ones that translate what this means to the tribe. And a lot of companies, I think, have to become better in that translation bit as well. You can take the same piece of content and you can say it in a way that shares the values and shares the language of the tribe that you want to reach, and it's going to be more targeted and successful. Then we have the ceremonial masters. Those are the ones that create the events, the meetups, the conferences. The community members are, like the lay persons, but each of them are natural advocates in the sense that wherever they go, they bring their tribes with them. And they will be connecting with people and new potential tribe members and so forth. Then we have a role which I call the crone. And that crone is essentially, like the guide, so to say. The spirit master, whatever you want to say, in the sense that it guides people and is very good into bringing people and newbies into the culture. And a lot of companies that want to, start with tribal marketing, they need a person that is like that can be like their guide. And I think many companies, once they have decided what tribes they want to reach to, they should start connecting with that tribe themselves, but it could